Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 California gubernatorial election and where things stand now all the news surrounding Eric Swalwell has broken, who's the next most likely candidate to be the governor of the state of California. So if you've been following this race, you'll probably know a lot more about this than I'm about to say, but just for a quick recap of this, the 2026 California gubernatorial election is scheduled to take place on November 3rd, 2026. Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is term limited and cannot seek a third consecutive term. He's probably going to be running for president in 2028, but that's a whole other video as well. California utilizes a nonpartisan top two primary election system, which is the top two vote getters advance to the general election and face off in that. So California, obviously, it's possible there could be a Democrat and Republican, but it's not 100% a guarantee. Given the right environment, it's possible there could be two Democrats, there could be two Republicans. As I mentioned, there could be a Democrat or Republican. There could be, depending on which candidates get the most votes, it can go many different ways. Now, there are currently, according to the most recent odds here, 61 candidates that are on the ballot. Now, California overall is a heavily Democratic state that Republicans have not won in a very long time. Looking at the map, you can look at the election results for California. I voted for Democrat Kamala Harris, who's from the state of California in 2024, by 20.1%. The last time California was even remotely close, you have to go back to 2004 when John Kerry won it against George Bush by around 10 points, and that was the closest it's been. On the governor level, the last time California went red, you'd have to go back to, I believe, 2006 when Arnold Schwarzenegger won by 17 points. Once that election was over in 2020, it flipped to Democrat Jerry Brown, who won by 12.9%. So California, barring a massive upset, is going to be a very reliably blue state. Now, as for this race, there are several candidates running, and it really is all over the place now that Eric Swalwell is out of the race. As for the general election, though, assuming a Democrat makes it there, it's probably going to be a safe Democratic win. Gavin Newsom won in 2022, 59.18%, to Republican Brian Dahley's 40.82%. Before that, in 2018, when Newsom was first elected, he won 61.95% to the Republican John Cox's 38.05%. Now, this was also during 2018 in a Democratic midterm year when Donald Trump was in his first term in office, so we can expect it's probably going to look something similar to this when everything is said and done. Now, as for the primary, Gavin Newsom finished in first place, getting 33.67% of the vote. John Cox got 25.38% to finish in second. Antonio Villargosa, who's running for governor again in 2026, finished with 13.31%. Now, here's the issue for the governor primary for California is how many people are running. It goes alphabetically here. There, as the article mentioned, 61 candidates running for office, including Eric Swalwell, who, even though he dropped out of the race, his name is remaining on the ballot. And there are a lot of people in this race. And the polling for right now, the market odds and the polling, they show that Republican Steve Hilton is currently the favorite. And we can look on the Wikipedia article as well here for a better visual look at this. Hilton is leading in most averages by roughly around 17.6%. This specific average I was looking at, Decision HQ, has him at 17.9%. The next closest candidate is Tom Steyer, a Democrat, at 14.7%. Swalwell, despite dropping out of the race, is still in third place at roughly about 12.5%. Fourth place, you have Chad Bianco, the Republican, at 10.5%. Then you have, you could say, Katie Porter, the Democrat congresswoman or former congresswoman, at 8%. Matt Mahan at 4%, Democrat, and Antonio Villargosa at 3.2%. Now, there is still a massive amount of either undecided voters or third candidate voters as well left out here, with roughly about 20 to 25% of the vote still ultimately undecided. So how this ultimately goes is going to be very interesting to see here because, yes, Steve Hilton and Tom Steyer have the lead, and if the election were held today, they would probably be the top two vote getters, but there's certainly a lot of people out there that have either not made up their minds on this race or have made up their mind and are not saying that can heavily skew and impact the general election results. So it's going to be very interesting to see how ultimately this all plays out. And as for who emerges from this primary field, well, President Trump made a pretty big development in this race a few weeks ago, which before the Eric Swalwell news broke, he endorsed Steve Hilton, the Republican former Fox News host, in this race as the Republican candidate. Now, before this, The polling actually showed Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco, the two Republican candidates, leading in first place. Eric Swalwell was at 13.2, Katie Porter 13.2 as well. Now, there was some hope among Republicans that the Democrats would divide the vote amongst themselves enough for both Hilton and Bianco to be the top two vote getters, advance to the general election, and the Republicans would have a governor in California. However, once Donald Trump endorsed Steve Hilton, Hilton's support remained about the same or started going up a few points or so, but Chad Bianco's support went from about 16 points down to about 11. So certainly that endorsement has helped Hilton, but definitely hurt Chad Bianco, and has now boosted the Democrats' opportunity at having a Democratic candidate advance to the general election. Though truthfully, just looking at the numbers though, California is such a Democratic state, and Democrats in special elections and primary elections have been outperforming Republicans pretty much everywhere in 2025 and 2026. So the odds of the Democrats not having at least one candidate for 2026 in the governor's race looks pretty unlikely with the Hilton versus Bianco matchup. But even still, now that Trump made the endorsement, it's looking like Steve Hilton will probably advance to the Republican candidate. The question is going to be, does one Democrat emerge as the leading vote getter? And right now, so far, it seems to be Tom Steyer. The most recent poll to come out of this race was between Survey USA between April 8th and 10th, though it does say it's before Swalwell dropped out of the race on April 12th. But in that poll, Tom Steyer led with 21%. Steve Hilton was in second at 18%. Swalwell, who's still in the race at the time, had 9%. And then Katie Porter had 8%. Chad Bianco had 8%. Mahan Beccera had 4%. And Tony Thurmond had 1%. Antonio Villargosa also had 5% as well. There are other candidates in the race like Betty Yee, who has 4%, and this one with still 18% of voters undecided. So ultimately, what shakes out for the California primary for 2026, it's still a little premature to say for sure because there is such amount of undecided votes still left to go. But it looks like Steve Hilton and Tom Steyer are the early favorites at this current point in time. Though Eric Swalwell at 12.5%, now that he's dropped out of the race and his scandal's been very public, what's happening in the country around the news, it's very obvious that Swalwell will probably not remain at 12.5%. Seeing as he's going to stay on the ballot, he may still get a percent or two, but those 12.5% of voters that supported Swalwell are going to pick a new candidate to support. Is that Tom Steyer? Is that Katie Porter? Is that Matt Mahan? Antonio Villargosa? Xavier Beccera? It's going to remain to be seen. But we have to wait and see, very importantly, how those voters ultimately go. Usually, the California polls I remember covering from a few months ago was the Emerson poll, which came out March 7th through 9th. It showed Swalwell leading by 4 points at 17.3. I would imagine around the summertime, around July, at probably the latest, we're going to get another Emerson poll saying where the race is looking. And I ultimately think we're going to find out, I believe actually, to make sure it's not before the primary. Yeah, the primary is June 2nd, so it'll actually come even sooner than July. We're going to get a look relatively quickly at what are the people who support Eric Swalwell do. Because he's not going to get 12.5% in this ballot, or in the primary ballot now that these scandals have taken place. And who they decide to support, if it's Tom Steyer, could make a very big difference. As of Steyer's at 14.7, if that support goes to him, or even most of that support goes to him, that could get him into the low to mid 20s, which is almost, even with the undecided vote, give him a very strong chance of putting it out of space for any of the other candidates to catch him, outside of maybe Steve Hilton, the main Republican candidate. So as of right now, to me, my prediction for this race would be Tom Steyer versus Steve Hilton. After the Swalwell debacle, that Steyer and Hilton are the two that advance, and given that California is a very reliably blue state, as on the governor map here, I can just show you really quickly. There are 26 Republican governor seats right now, 24 for the Democrats. California is currently held by a Democrat, and I don't think this is going to change regardless of which Democrat wins. If one Democrat advances, I think it's going to remain a Democratic-held governor seat. But for Steyer versus Steve Hilton, I think we would see Tom Steyer end up winning and becoming the next governor of the state of California. In terms of what would Tom Steyer and how he would win this primary, I saw an interesting post on X a few days ago, which kind of called him the Michael Bloomberg type candidate of this race, similar to Bloomberg's run in 2020 for president, where as a billionaire running, he spent a ton of money to get a formidable amount of support, and all he basically has to do in this race is just try and survive and get as much support as possible, while other candidates around him, he has enough money to put his name out there and get a lot of notable endorsements. And it seems thus far, with Swalwell now dropping out, that it does seem to be working. But I'm interested to hear what you think about that take, all in the comment section down below. That is all I have for you in today's video. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. I hope to see you in a future video.